All right, back to Daniel chapter 3 this morning. Daniel chapter 3. We have read through the passage already, and I think out of the sermons I've done lately, this one is the one that I was most excited about as I was walking through it, just because of the different high points that are in this narrative passage. The title of the message this morning is In the Fire, and I suppose if you wanted a subline, and the Son of God. The last time we were in Daniel, we dealt with the boaster statue. That's the first part of chapter 3. And we juxtapositioned man's pride and arrogance with God's power and presence and how overwhelming that is in contrast to man's pride and arrogance. We saw that this golden statue, from man's perspective, it was enormous. It was literally taller than the heads on Mount Rushmore by quite a bit. All right, that's big. We talked about the immense furnace that would have been necessary, and that it had to be necessary to reach at least 1,947 degrees Fahrenheit. We talked about that because that's the melting point for gold, which is what they were looking to do. So it had to go at least that hot. We dealt with music. We dealt with the reality that music has a moral impress, and even more than that, it is moral. We then began to move into other things. I mentioned a couple of things quickly, and I'm not going to dive back into them this morning, but we talked about I would really call it the devilish issue of anti-Semitism, and how this was faced by Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Jewish men who, in the face of it, showed the most remarkable courage as they were under such terrible threats, attacks, false accusations concerning how they were loyal, and yet they remained steadfast and faithful in all of it. And then we ended that message 2 weeks ago by asking the question, will we stand with courage and conviction? This morning's question is a little different. It's how do we respond in the face of people who are angry with us or possibility of death. In this case, barring a divine miracle, it was certainty of death. Okay? So how do we face that? There are a lot of response things we could get into, and I don't want to digress into flight, fight, fawn, and those kind of things this morning. That's not our objective this morning. But there's a lot of ways that we can respond, and we can do it in the flesh or we can do it in the spirit. I was kind of interested. Many of you know I'm kind of a bit of a news junkie, especially when it comes to current events and global goings-ons. I listened to one of the press conferences by General Kane, and one of the things he mentioned was he was wishing that the public could basically kind of, be listening in on the interactions of those who were in charge of defending Americans in the Middle East, whether it's on ships or on bases, whatever the case may be. And the statement I thought that was really interesting, he was talking about how he was lauding them, these really disciplined individuals. The word that struck me, though, was when he used the word calm. Most of us, that struck me as a little unusual, because if you have suicide drones and ballistic missiles and things of those nature flying at you, calm is not the typical response. But these individuals, they knew this was the job, this is what was in front of them, and they did it. They didn't complain, they didn't give trouble, they just calmly completed their responsibilities. And I thought that was really, really remarkable. Calm in the face of fury and rage. And I think that's what many of our service members are dealing with, as there's just this lashing out that takes place. How do you deal with it? How do you stay calm? How do you stay calm to the point where you can be precise with what you're doing? It's not easy. It is not easy. And so for us, what do we do? How do we handle when fury and rage come our way? How do we handle difficulties right? Maybe even somebody that explodes at you. How do you handle angry outbursts? How do you handle that issue that comes your way? Obviously, it's one thing to say, stay calm, right? You can say that. It's a lot harder to do. It's a lot harder to do, right? You can say, stay rational. Yeah, you can say that, but it's a lot harder to do that. And you have heard me repeat many times, in the midst of challenge, it's important to stay focused on spiritual realities, who you are in Christ, what the Spirit wants you to do. There again, easier said than done, for sure. Now, something I want to stop on for just a minute, and I didn't dive into when we were in the first half of this chapter, okay? Nebuchadnezzar is clearly so furious, he is not thinking straight, okay? This furnace is already at roughly 2,000 degrees. We'll use round numbers so it's easy to figure, right? 1947 to repeat is over and over. Let's go 2,000, right? So we have an even number. It's roughly at around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And he is commanding the people manning the furnace to make it 7 times hotter. Okay? Does anybody know how hot the surface of the sun is? It's just under 10,000 degrees. If they had taken it 7 times hotter, that would have been more than 4,000 degrees hotter than the surface of the sun. Okay? Nebuchadnezzar is clearly not thinking straight. Okay? That's clearly not the case. And we are a long ways from the sun. When you go outside, you can feel its warmth. Okay? They have a furnace sitting right in front of them. He wants it hotter than the surface of the sun. Clearly not thinking straight. He is in a rage that I didn't delve into before, but obviously, he's out of his mind. He is so angry that they wouldn't do what he said that he has gone into this full outburst. Okay? Now, just on a scientific level, that kind of heat would have liquefied and then evaporated the heat bricks inside the furnace. Okay? That's intense. That's intense. So clearly they didn't do what he said, but he wasn't in a mind to know whether or not they were doing it or not. They just heated it to the very hottest they thought that the furnace could take. So just so we're all on the same page, some of the best fire brick of that era probably could only sustain about 3,400 degrees Fahrenheit without decomposing or breaking down, because the heat would have been so difficult. So the people put it to max temperature. Now, just so we have a little juxtapositioning here, when you turn your oven on to cook something in the oven, usually it's about 350 degrees is typical for what you're cooking in the oven, okay? If you've ever knelt over as you're opening the door to the stove and put your face near that, when the heat comes out from 350, it'll singe your eyebrows, okay, if you get close enough, all right? It's one of those things like, not talking from experience, right? That'd be silly to do that. One of those things you're just like, that's hot, right? Now put it 10 times that hot, okay? Roughly, little under that, but basically 10 times that hot, and you're going to be throwing people into this. Nebuchadnezzar was not thinking clearly. And then he commands his most mighty men. It's like, why don't you just have the guards do it? Right? Or the guys that have actually heat shielded stuff because they're working with the furnace. That would be smart. Nope. He pulls in the best guys, like your commando guys, your big built guys. He's like, you guys go bind them and throw them in. All right? And this is what's taking place. And now, the furnace in our bulletin, that's probably not exactly what it looked like. I like it. It gets our mind set and ready to talk about this today. I really appreciate that. But when you look at a furnace, if you've ever been on one of those, you've seen one of those old ones that has the fire bricks inside, they're huge. They wouldn't fit inside our auditorium. And their stacks go up sometimes 30, 40, 50 feet. And this one, it would have been much greater than that, huge. Okay? And there probably would have been more than one access point. Okay? They would have had a higher access point where they would have dumped the gold material in, and then they would have had an access point below that where they would have pulled the melted gold out. Okay, so this is kind of what you have going on. So they're coming in, these mighty men grab Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they bind them, and they throw them in with all their clothes on. Glad they left those on, right? All right, so they throw them in there, and they toss them down into the furnace. So we see this very clearly as they go. It says, then these men were bound with their coats, verse 21, their hats and all their garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. They're tossed in. Okay? So there's an elevated place. They're put in the furnace. It's superheated. And it is so superheated that the guys who are throwing them in basically get burnt alive. Okay? I don't know if it was full incineration or not, but it says the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I prefer Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, but we'll use this for now. Okay? So the three guys are taken up there. The most mighty men in Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom are taking, binding them, putting them in there. And these guys, it says the fire slew them. Now, if you want to know something about heat and flames and all this kind of stuff, if you can contain it, that's good. Okay? One of the most incredible things I think I've seen around fire was when our house had a house fire in it, back when we lived in Jackson. There were electrical wires that I didn't know about inside the wall above the firebox of our fireplace. Cold night, I'd heated it very hot. It had melted them together and started a fire inside the walls of that cavity. That probably happened in the evening when we got the fire pretty warm, built it up for the nighttime to put bigger pieces in, closed it down and kind of got it nice and hot, and then we all got ready to go to bed. By about 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, why does it smell like smoke? All right? Now, it was super hot like 6 hours ago, but we hadn't noticed any problems. Now I'm beginning to smell something. I won't rehash the whole story. Long story short, we got the family out. Praise the Lord that, by the way, drywall is fire rated, just so we're all on the same page. Okay? It was in this cavity, and it was in that cavity for a long time. Got Chloe out, got Sharon out. We were able to get that out. And the thing that amazed me is when we got outside and the fire people finally got there, they took their axes and they hit the wall above the mantle, above where the fireplace was at, and immediately flames just leaped. They just went racing across the ceiling, trying to engulf the entire living room. I've never seen anything like that. It just was like, wow. Now that was what was inside those walls was probably a lot less than 1,000 degrees. This is probably 3 to 5 times hotter than what was inside those walls. And when those flames came out, it just raced. Like you couldn't see the firefighters anymore. They were just encased in flame, and you're like, how do they do that as a job? I'm watching from outside the house through the windows, looking in and watching flames racing across our living room ceiling as it just tries to lick up anything it can get a hold of. That would have been what took place here, only on a much hotter level. So these guys, it wouldn't have mattered how strong they were. The flames would have just encased them because it would have been so terribly hot and so terribly intense. Okay? And I have to admit, the one thought I thought of this is I'm like, man, I felt so bad for those firefighters. They're in full flame retardant gear, but when they got done, they looked tough. Having flames come out and surround you it's got to be intense. And I understand why they used as much water as they did. They needed to get those down as fast as possible. Now, for these guys, there's a real possibility these mighty men were not believers. The sad part of it is these guys probably had to face flames that ended their life and then face that for eternity. It's a sad reality. Now, to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, these individuals of faith, they were literally thrown into this furnace that is superheated. And they're probably thrown from this elevated platform area down to where then they could be, right, where the gold would then be drawn back out underneath. And they were tossed in. The guys who just tossed them in are encased in flame and dying. I don't know what that would have been like. It would have been horrific. That would have been an incredible scene. These three fellows are now down in a furnace that would burn cast iron, a fire that would burn stainless steel, a fire that would burn carbon steel. Like, it would melt these metals. I understand chromium is one of the ones that's most difficult to melt. Nickel, titanium, all of these would have melted in there. Okay? The most impressive metals we could come up with would have melted very quickly. So the question is, how did they survive? The most mighty men in the kingdom just got burnt alive on the platform. How did they survive? I think the answer is super simple. God did it. God did it. God is the one who has made everything we understand about science, and He has the ability to do the miraculous and supersede His natural creation. That's well within the ability of God. The longer I live, by the way, the more I think that this expression rings absolutely true and brings incredible comfort. God did it. He steps in. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah's response before Nebuchadnezzar was really incredible. We finished with that 2 weeks ago. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Not doing it. It didn't matter to them. They didn't matter if they were bound in fetters. It didn't matter if there was persecution and anti-Semitism. It didn't matter to them if they were going to be facing the cruelty of incineration alive. Okay? For some of us, that would test our faith. And we'd be like, do I want to be incinerated alive? That would be hard. That would be a hard test. I think all of us have faced trials and testing in our life. And I'm glad that for many of us, we've passed many of those tests well. Some of us have had times where the test did not go so well, or the response was not so well. Take heart. There will be more. More tests that we can face. More tests that as we have seen God faithful in the past, we can look forward and say, God has been faithful in the past, and I know He's going to be in the future. He can enable me to do this, and He can enable me to face this test with courage and conviction. And He can even help me to remain calm, right? In my flesh, probably not. But if God is there enabling and I'm yielded to His Spirit, it's entirely possible, and it's most likely. It really is. We can see God work through us. We can watch God give victories. Incredible. At the end of the day, you got to be able to look back and be like, look what God did. Look what God did. This doesn't mean that there isn't wickedness that abounds around us, both in the physical world and in the world system itself, right? And it doesn't mean that world system isn't going to try and mess with us. It's not going to try and tempt us or test us or cause us problems or trip us up. But you can stand in the power of God. They fell down into the midst of the burning fiery furnace, the end of verse 23 says. I love verses 24 and 25. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished. I don't know if astonishment quite covers it. Remember, this guy was just in a rage to have these guys incinerated. And rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. Yeah, we watched you do that. Yes, we did that. And he answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Walking in the flame. Now, we talked a little bit about the science end of this. This would have been so hot, it would have been near clear. That's why it was much easier to see. When flame reaches temperatures approaching 3,400 degrees, it moves to a nearly translucent flame. Many of you have seen blue flame and those type of that. The next one up is basically a clear. So he's looking into the furnace that is superheated, and he can clearly see four individuals walking around. They're no longer bound. There's nothing bound on them any longer. They're walking around completely free. They were loose. They were walking in the midst of this burning fiery furnace that is superheated, and they showed 0 signs of injury. Sometimes we can't get through a basketball game without getting injured, right? They were in this furnace, all right? In a furnace that should have been melting the metals that we say you can't melt, right? Incredibly. They were not acting like men in a furnace that was heated to several thousand degrees. But the entire issue of this was not them, it was the 4th. Who was there with them? Well, it's the one who had already cleansed Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, so that they could act and speak with courage and conviction. They could do so in the face of what looked like imminent death. Holding true to their convictions, he was there with them. As I was thinking through what it must have been like facing that superheated furnace after seeing Nebuchadnezzar furious, their response was essentially to fall on their faith, to fully trust God. And they were ready to do so even if God did not show up in a physical way. That's remarkable. That is absolutely remarkable. The part that's even more remarkable is he did. He did show up. He showed up in a powerful way. And to the point that from outside the furnace at a good distance, because you wouldn't have wanted to be near it like the guys who were just burnt, even to a pagan king, there was a 4th figure that was unmistakable, and the only term he could come up with was, that looks like the Son of God. To a pagan king who didn't acknowledge God, that was his conclusion. It's remarkable. He had just been trying to force everyone in his kingdom to bow down before a golden idol. And I don't want to take time to digress this morning, but we could talk about materialism and chasing wealth and all kinds of other things that are out there. It's possible he even had his likeness on the statue. It's possible. Okay? Yet, all the focus now shifts to the 4th individual in the furnace who didn't get thrown in there by Nebuchadnezzar. He was in there voluntarily. He put himself in there. The Son of God takes center stage so that Nebuchadnezzar is amazed. He moves with haste. What he is seeing, he can't believe. He moves to speak with his counselors to verify, am I hallucinating? Did I just get so angry I'm hallucinating? Or is this real? What Nebuchadnezzar sees, he has never seen before. 3 men who should have been instantly incinerated are walking around free. Okay? They're walking around free in this furnace. And there's a 4th that he can only describe as, man, that looks like the Son of God. Okay? My suspicion is the 4th was far more glorious in appearance than the other 3. And the attention was on the 4th. Now, as to the, I won't belabor this, but as to the incineration part, when they cremate bodies now, they have to be above, I think, 1,000 degrees, but they can go, some of the better ones can go up to about 1,800. This furnace would have been much hotter than cremating a body. Okay, that ends up in a little bit of ashes at the end. Okay, this furnace was probably at least twice that hot, maybe 3 times. Okay, But that wasn't the remarkable part of this. The remarkable part is there's another person who inserted himself. And the form was so unmistakable to a pagan king who didn't acknowledge God that he said, "Man, that looks like the Son of God." He couldn't miss it. All right, we could talk about security. We could talk about preservation. We could talk about deliverance that God gives. But the focus really is on the power and the presence of God. This is the same God, by the way, who for us has promised He will never leave us nor forsake us. Okay? Verse 26 says, "Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and he spake, and he said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. And they came forth in the midst of the fire." Even Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges there could only be one reason why you survived. It must be because you were servants of the Most High God that you would not deny, and He showed up for you. That had to be his conclusion. He had no other conclusion. He had to basically say, God did that. And he didn't want to acknowledge God. It's remarkable. I will adamantly contest the safest place to be is at the center of God's will, doing what He calls us to do. Verse 27, all these other fellas, all the leaders of the area saw these men whose bodies the fire had no power, nor the hair of their heads singed, neither were their coats changed, nor even the smell of fire on them. Wasn't there. Okay? I have burnt an egg or two in my day, or a piece of meat on the stovetop. Those electric stovetops are usually about 1,000 degrees. All right? And you leave it on high, you walk away for a second, come back, and you're like, I shouldn't have done that. All right? Bad idea. All right? But no, this was total deliverance. Right? And you have to open the windows, get the smoke smell out of the house, right? That happens. This was total deliverance. In a furnace that should have instantly incinerated their entire bodies, God protected even their coats and their hats. Everything they were wearing, there was not even the smell of smoke on them. That is absolutely remarkable. Okay? It's an amazing, amazing thing. And the same individual who had just been in fury, commanding them to be incinerated alive, he's now amazed. He's astonished. Now, don't miss this on the other side. Sin always has consequences. Nebuchadnezzar had rage, right? He was furious and out of control. Sin has consequences. The most mighty men in his kingdom perished. They weren't coming back, right? They weren't coming back. And there are those in history who have shown they were willing to take it all the way to the fire and go through the fire. Individuals like William Tyndale are at the top of that list in my perspective. He was burned at the stake in 1536 in England. His dying prayer was, God, open the eyes of the King of England. By the way, a modernized version of what he prayed for, it's right here. Okay, it's King James Bible, 1611. Coming off of that, a modernization that we have in our hands. A direct answer, I believe, to Tyndale's dying prayer was that the English Bible would come along. I don't have time this morning. I love hymn 406 in our hymn roll. God leads us along. But in the end, God is glorified. His saints are left to us as sterling examples of courage and conviction, showing the character of somebody who is indwelt by the Spirit of God. And they entered that incredible cloud of witnesses who cheer us on. Verse 28 and 29.